Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I didn't plan to climb a freight car at dusk. It happened because the city around us felt smaller by the hour. Streets narrowed by jammed vehicles. Avenues pinched by barricades, buses, and people moving with the same tight, careful step. I had radio chatter in one ear and my own breath in the other as we cut south along the edge of the Brighton Park crossing towards the Santa Fe line. I worked 10 years in public safety communications in Cook County. Dispatch consoles, repeater bays, emergency radio caches. But none of that kept the air from smelling like burned antifreeze and old smoke. We were only a dozen blocks west of the loop, but it could have been another planet. Sirens still flared now and then, but they had changed timbre, closer, thinner, like a throat clearing for the last time. The train that saved us, or trapped us, depending on where you pause the story, came through on a long green at Western Avenue. I saw the ditch lights burst white around the curve first, then the dark wedge of a Givo nose, and then the endless gray of covered hoppers and refrigerator cars with their diesel units coughing a steady note. I could read the reporting marks even in the dim. BNSF, Tilex, RMN, FBox, HBRX. Mixed freight, a lot of perishables and grain, with a mid-train set of distributed power somewhere because you don't move that much mass with one set of trucks. The lead unit's horn pattern for the crossing was clean. 2 long, 1 short, 1 long, and then the locomotives were past us with the smell of hot creosote, steel dust, and a hint of ammonia from a nearby yard. We moved because everybody else moved. You could see it on the faces of the handful of people shadowing us along the fence line, the reflex when something carrying momentum offers you a thin chance and a bad plan. I had a handheld scanner hooked to a stock whip antenna, and it was alive with AAR band traffic. A Trackside detector near Cicero yelled into the air a minute later, "BNSF detector, milepost 181.5, track 2, no defects, total axles 536. 536 axles put the train well over 100 cars. It wasn't going to stop for anyone. "Grab the F-box," Cole said. He was gray-bearded, late 50s, compression socks peeking out above his boots, and he hadn't told us until that very minute that he'd done 20 years as a conductor on the Transcon. I don't know if he'd meant to keep it quiet or if, like all of us, he spent his words carefully now. The 40-foot box. That's a roll-up, lower sill, easiest ladder. June was on my left, an ER nurse from Northwestern with an athletic calm I leaned on more than I admitted. Ravi was on my right, grad student from IIT with a mind for troubleshooting and a backpack that clinked like a toolbox. Walt, retired farmer from near DeKalb, brought up the rear with a quietly determined woman named Katia who drove a rig out of Joliet. There were 3 others whose names I didn't learn until much later. Too much air moving too quickly around us to trade more than breath and direction. We paced as the cars went by. Grain hoppers with their high ladders and no roof walks because the FRA had seen enough broken ankles. Reefers with split-plug doors and the rectangular housings of their Thermo King units buzzing. Gondolas with steel bundled down. Cole slapped the side of a faded F-box and pointed to the ladder. "Now," he said. And June moved first because June always moved first. She caught the rung, hopped, and swung inside the grab irons like she'd done it 100 times. I went after her, the feel of the steel cold and a little greasy, my forearms firing, thighs trying to remember how to be 25 again. When my boots hit the tiny ledge beside the door track, I could smell the inside of the car. Corrugated wood floor, a decade of dust, spilled flour, faint citrus from long-ago cargo. Ravi came in last, and as he did, someone outside slammed the roll-up door down. It rattled hard enough to make our teeth click. A steel hasp snapped shut and a padlock clicked, flat and final. For a heartbeat, we all stared at each other in the dim light from the high vents, the daylight slicing across like bandsaw blades. The door was locked from the outside. Whoever did it was close enough to touch and then gone. "Hey!" Walt yelled through the slots. He might as well have yelled into a canyon. The rail, the wind, the reefer hum. It snatched the word and tore it into useless streamers. The car's interior took on a low mechanical resonance as we picked up speed. The vaguely hopeful plan to ride a few miles, jump off safely, and cut south toward the river turned into something else. June put a hand on Walt's shoulder. "We'll figure it out," she said. "We're inside and no one's grabbing at us. That's a good start." Cole tapped the wall with a knuckle and listened. "Box is empty. We didn't pick a grain car, we picked the right car. We can move end to end. If there's an end ladder, we can get to a brake wheel platform. Then we can move to an adjacent car at an angle when things straighten." "What about the lock?" I asked. Cole looked at me like I'd just asked him whether trains ran on tracks. "Locks are to keep honest people honest and load crews from getting blamed. If we can get outside at a guide and wait for a curve, we can step to the ladder on the next car. But first, we learn what we're on." We learned fast. The F-box was clean and empty. Forward end had an old brake wheel, but the chain wasn't attached to anything. It had been cut out long ago when retainer valves and air made it redundant on this style of car. There were 4 stake pockets per side, and the dull sheen of polyurethane where cargo had been. The door end had nothing but sheet steel and a faint chalk scrawl, Chi GBG FTMDSN KCSY, somewhat shorthand for Route West with Galesburg and Fort Madison and Kansas City in it. The scanner chattered. "BNSF Warbonnet 3679, West, clear, signal Western Avenue, Main 2. Another detector announced itself deeper downline. The cadence of the axles changed in my ear as we left the tight, jointed rail inside the city and found long-welded rail that sang instead of chattered. We were riding a river of steel, and we were pointed toward the Mississippi. There's a thing that happens in a moving boxcar when you stop shouting. Your body calibrates to the sway and yaw. Your eyes learn the small vocabulary of light and shadow that tells you how fast you're running and whether the engineer is rolling the throttle or playing the dynamics. The car's own metal tells you where you stand. The F-box had a low thrum, constant as a pump. Somewhere further back, the reefers added a tighter note that rose and fell as their units cycled. June took a knee and unzipped her pack. "We're okay on water for a day or 2 if we're smart," she said. "I've got a filter straw, chem tabs, and a 2-liter bladder. Granola and a jar of peanut butter. I'd trade someone for a spoon." Ravi produced a multi-tool and a camp spork, like he'd rehearsed for this moment. Katia pulled a vacuum-wrapped emergency blanket and a coil of paracord. Walt had what he called a trucker's pantry tucked into a canvas lunch pail, jerky, crackers, apple slices he dehydrated at home, and a little container of salt. Cole had a railroad key he called an E-key on a lanyard. He swung it in a small circle and the brass winked in the light. "If we get to something with a lock made for us," he said, "this will talk to it." "Why would someone lock us in?" I asked. Cole shrugged. "Could be someone thought they were helping. Could be they didn't want us walking around on their freight. Could be there's something in one of those reefers they don't want opened." He nodded toward the side wall like he could see through it. "I hear a Thermo King SB unit. Those are the big rectangular housings you saw. Keeps at -20 for ice cream or +34 for produce. You don't break a cold chain because you're curious." I put the scanner on a short lanyard, tucked it into my chest pocket, and switched to AAR Channel 66, one of the dispatch channels used out here. I thumbed through a few more, listening. The voice of a dispatcher out of Fort Worth was thin but steady, and I'd never loved a human I didn't know more than I loved the consistency of that voice in that hour. 3205 West, your line to Galesburg, Maine 2, no meets to Cameron. Detector at 197 is out of service, report dragging equipment. How do we make it stop? June said, soft enough that only the four of us near her heard it. We don't, not from in here, Cole said. From the head end, yes. From a distributed power set, maybe. You can put a train into emergency with a brake pipe dump, open an angle cock anywhere, and the air dumps, brakes set, everything stops eventually. But don't do that on a bridge or in a town. Don't do it at speed unless you want to ride a storm of slack that'll turn your knees into powder, and you can't get to an angle cock from inside a sealed box. Angle cock, Ravi said, like he was making a note. Valves on the ends of the cars, Cole said. Shut one fast, and you vent the brake pipe to atmosphere. Train thinks something broke, but on a train like this, someone might have tied the handles up with wire to keep them from walking and setting in transit. Happened to me once. We were dropping into Amarillo and a kid yanked one with a hook. Dumped the whole string. Took us 4 hours to recharge the pipe and get rolling. He took the E-key off his lanyard and twirled it again. Someone knew we were here. Someone slapped a lock. That tells me two things. They wanted to keep us in, and they're still thinking in terms of procedures. This train is running like we're not in the middle of what we're in. Listen to the rhythm. He's on notch 5 or 6. Trip optimizer on, maybe leader if it's a Wobtech. Alerter's getting acknowledged. PTC is either cut out or he's got a green wave lined by dispatch. None of that happens by accident. English, Katia said. She'd sat with her back against the side wall and was massaging the meat of her palm like she was trying to wipe away wheel vibrations. He's not asleep, Cole said. And if he's not asleep, whoever locked the door did it on purpose. Oh, we didn't have much agency for the next 2 hours. The city fell away in wide slabs of brick and viaduct. Then industrial yards with lines of cars waiting to be pulled. Then warehouse backs with blown-out loading docks. A low sun brushed the side of the car, a warmer gold. Then the light went soft and even. Switches clacked under us in long, confident throws. Trains don't look fast when you're standing beside them, unless you're close enough to feel your breath get taken. Inside one, they feel exactly as fast as you fear, and exactly as fast as you hope. When the scanner announced BNSF detector milepost 187.1, no defects, total axles 536, we knew we were closing the gap to the river. The detectors were the only voices that didn't carry a human worry. Each one sang its measurement into the air and went back to listening to heat and sound. The smell changed as we moved west. Chicago's particular stew of lake damp, exhaust, hot rails, and food carts decayed into grain dust, diesel, and the wide green smell of late summer corn. We passed a point where the left-hand windows turned from brick to trees and then to open field. You feel that in your chest before your eyes catch up. A big breath you didn't know you were holding gets let go. Cole had us sit low, backs to the wall, arms looped through improvised straps tied to the car's tie-down rings. If there's a slack run-in or run-out, he said, you don't want to be mid-step. Keep 3 points of contact with something even sitting still. He told us about slack like he was teaching a class, how between cars there's room to breathe that breath all at once when a heavy string starts or stops. How the little gulf between couplers might be an inch or a foot or more depending on where you were in the train and the grade. How, when that gulf closed or opened, it had a way of throwing a body if that body was just a little off balance. We ate by turns. Ravi passed around jerky. June cut the granola bars into methodically equal pieces and alternated them with cracker halves. Walt gave us all a few dried apple slices that tasted like a childhood you didn't know you were saving. I had a water bottle with 1.5 liters in it, and I didn't tell anyone how much I'd taken before we climbed, because I didn't know how to make that math look good. I checked the scanner battery. I checked the little handheld radio that lives in the bottom of the bag I used to carry into dead buildings during off-hours maintenance windows. It was a VHF-UHF unit that you'd recognize even if the brand name meant nothing to you. Simple, tough, a little cheap, but better than nothing when you want to throw your voice a little further without yelling. "Those reefers," June said, eyes on the wall. "You said they keep it cold enough for ice cream. What else?" "Vaccines," Cole said. "Meat. Anything with a temperature range you don't mess with." "You hear anything?" I asked. Katia tilted her head. "I hear diesel units cycling," she said. "I also hear something else. A rhythm, not the trains." Ravi closed his eyes like he was sliding a fader down. "Taps," he said. "No, not taps. Something moving against the wall, then stopping, then moving again." We all sat very still then and listened. The tap came from our left, through steel and air at a 45-degree angle. It was brief and then gone. If it had been a load shifting, it would have been followed by more, by a groan or a drag. This was a test touch. The way you might lay your palm on a window to be sure you weren't looking at a reflection. Cole's chin dipped, then came up like a slow seesaw. "A Armin reefer," he said. Not because he could see the lettering, but because he had already built the diagram in his head. If we're on an F-box, the reefer string is likely 2 or 3 cars over on our left. If someone wanted us not to go wander and open doors they didn't want open, they'd lock the car they saw us climb. They'd put a padlock on a hasp that's there for a hand-level chain, and they'd call that a plan. "You think they're loaded with something that could get out?" June said. Cole didn't answer right away. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I think the world outside wasn't dangerous enough for the person who locked that door," he said. "So they made sure the dangerous thing inside stayed that way." We cleared the river at Fort Madison after dark. I knew it was Fort Madison because the bridge sings in a particular way. The swing span puts a long low hoot into the floor, and you can smell the water and the old steel like an antique store that never closes. The scanner clicked and gave us a detector reading for the west side. BNSF detector, milepost 201.6, no defects. I pictured the latticework of steel against the black and tried not to imagine the drop. We slept in turns, if you can call the nervous drift of the body toward rest sleep. Every law of motion was present for us. Bodies in motion remain in motion. Fatigue remains until you drain it, or it drains you. At some point past midnight, the rhythm of the cars changed in a way that even a newborn would notice. The whole train gave a small shrug and then a deeper, rolling sigh. An air change. June's eyes opened immediately. Cole didn't so much wake up as he did to come back into focus. "Distributed power," he said. "There's a mid-train set. We're within 50 cars of it. Feel that?" The tone changed. "Another set of traction motors is adding or taking power. There's a low-cycle note coming through my back teeth." Ravi smiled because he heard it too. "You can feel the PWM," he said. And then he explained to me how a drive system makes a sound even when you can't see it. The way a fluorescent ballast hums in a room with no light. The way an inverter tells you with your bones what it's doing to get a motor to turn. It was either a GEES 44 AC or an EMD SD70 ACE or their cousins back there. Anything delivering AC traction. You could have convinced me it had a name and a birthday. If we could reach the DPU, we could reach a platform. And if we could reach a platform, we could lay a hand on the air brake line that jumped from car to car, and we could open an angle cock in a way that either ended us or saved us. That math sponsored everything we did for most of the next day. We waited for the gray to come up behind the slats, and while we waited, we taught each other some small trove of skills we hadn't realized we'd collected. June showed us how to stretch the muscles that get forgotten in stress and to breathe on the fours, the trick every nurse learns for her patients and then keeps for herself. Walt showed us how to use a bandana and a little salt to take the edge off the taste of stale water. Katia showed us a trucker's knot that held a load without slipping and could be released with a single pull. Ravi showed me how to use a little RF choke coil he'd built out of a steel bolt and some wire to tame the hash coming off the reefer units so the scanner could hear the detectors clearly again. I showed them how to program the handheld to the known railroad calling frequencies and the FRS channels most civilians used on road closures that weren't going to reopen. By mid-morning, we had a plan as firm as anything born in motion could be. Cole would lead us to the far end of the car. We'd use the little toe holds built into the door frame to step to the external ladder. We'd clip a line around the waist of the first person out with an improvised harness and belay from inside. Then, when the train straightened and the sway damped, we'd step carefully across the narrow space between our car and the next, and then again to reach the end platform of a covered hopper. Hoppers have real platforms, small, steel, mean, but built for a boot and a hand. From there, you can crab walk an end beam to the service ladder and then to the crossover. If the cars ahead held, we'd stair-step our way car to car toward the mid-train locomotives. We shouldn't have been able to do it. That's the part of the story I don't tell in the version I rehearse at 3 a.m, but we were so afraid of staying still that we did the thing that made the least sense and the most difference. I went third. The second the outside air hit me, all the air I'd been rationing since the door slammed came back in a rush that tasted like dry wheat and steel. The ground was a blur. I focused on the bolt heads and the paint chips and the inches my boot told me it had to fire and no more. It helped to think of the modularity of the machines, how someone had designed this ladder and the bolts that held it, and the measurements that placed it that way, how what I had to do was work within that design. We made the first cross, we made the second. On the third, the couplers made a small argument that shook my boot sideways and I thought I would end in the ballast. The line on my waist went taut and held, and June's hands were there on the back of my jacket, like a quick tether to a planet. We made the fourth because we'd made the first 3. By the time we found the first set of reefers, I already knew their sound. It's a patient throat clear. A 2-cylinder little diesel beats against the fairing, and you could almost hear the thermostat's opinion moving through the line. The unit's housing said Thermo King SB 330. The side doors had tamper seals with printed numbers, and the paint above them had stencils in block letters, "Do not open, cold chain." Below, USDA 7 CFR 46. It wasn't a legal line I recognized. It was a reference to rules about the transport of perishable agricultural commodities. Fair enough. Produce bound for a West Coast warehouse. But the tamper seals were backed with padlocks. Someone had gone beyond the seals. "Something else," Cole said, and he tapped the corner of the stencil. Someone had added a red triangle with a marker and a hand-drawn symbol inside. 3 arcs, like the lower half of the radiation trefoil, but not quite. It looked like 3 stylized biohazard arms without the ring. Ravi said, "It's a symbol people used online for lab-grade biological waste when they didn't want to write the word out. Not official, but you see it in maker spaces when people store things like used agar plates and want to scare casual hands off." We moved. Every car took a thesis' worth of nerves. We matched the sway on the air and then stepped when the couplers lined up. We passed a string of covered hoppers, Cargill, ADM, private marks that told Walt things he said out loud to keep our heads from filling with silence. 200-ton car, 3 bays, Those top hatches are gasketed. Grain dust sticks to everything. Don't breathe that without a mask." The detail was a gift. He told us what you needed to know if you ever wanted to climb a ladder and not end in a silo. The mid-train locomotives were a pair of GE ES-44 ACs in BNSF orange with the black lightning stripe. To call them beautiful is a lie you tell to people who think machines are ugly. They were filthy and loud and wore their purpose like armor. The sidewalkways had grit-slick anti-slip panels. The grab irons were cold and harsh in the hand. The cab doors were locked. Cole tried his E-key and hissed when it didn't take. "Newer mods," he said. "Keyed different, remote only." He peered at the MU hoses and the set of angle cocks mounted on the pilot. "This is where we become heroes or stories." On the nose of the lid mid-train unit was a red mushroom button behind a wire guard. Emergency fuel cutoff. You press that and you kill the prime mover. It's made for the firefighter you hope never has to climb this high. It doesn't stop the train. It stops this engine. "We can dump the air here," Cole said. "It's the same brake pipe that runs the length. The angle cock is a quarter turn, but look," he pointed. Both the brake pipe and the main reservoir cocks had tinned wire through the handles and a lead crimp seal. "You could still open it," he said, "but someone didn't want a jostle to do it by accident, or a human to do it on purpose." I reached into my bag and pulled a little folding tool I'd carried since a winter storm took the grid down in Cook County for 3 days, and I slept on a cot under the glow of emergency LEDs. Hardened jaw, wire cutter at the heel. It cut the tie like a string. Cole looked at me, and then at the angle cock like he was about to call a play. "When I turn, we brace," he said. "You pull Ravi down, and you hold his jacket. You, Walt, you get your elbow into this stanchion. Sam, you tie us to the railing with that knot Katia taught. If this goes wrong and the car behind snaps as the slack rushes in and we're on the wrong part of the wave, we hold or we break. No middle." "Wait," June said, and she pressed her palm against the unit's metal like it was a forehead. She leaned close with a nurse's way of listening for something human inside a machine. "Listen," she said. The high note of the traction inverters sang under our feet. The engine note was steady, but there was a second rhythm. Not coming through the rails, coming through the body of the locomotive. A shudder, a heartbeat that wasn't a machine. "What is that?" Ravi said. "Reefer," Walt said, but he sounded unconvinced. No, that's too close." Katia stiffened. "It's behind us," she said, and we all looked down the string we had climbed. 3 cars back, the reefer we'd passed with the red triangle had a faint fog coming off the seam of its door. The refrigeration unit was running hard, exhaust fluttering, the little intake clicking, and something inside was tapping, patient, rhythmic, as if waiting for feedback from the outside. I felt every teachable minute of my career present itself at once. Radios are about signal and noise and what you can fit in the narrow space between. The tapping wasn't code, not in any sense that would make it a proof, but it wasn't random either. Slow, then fast, then a pause. Fingers? Tools? We weren't supposed to open that car. We would open that car if we stopped. If we stopped in the wrong place and someone curious was near, someone would. Cole's hand tightened on the angle cock handle. He didn't turn. "Whoever locked us in," he said, voice low and steady in the mechanized wind, "knew what was inside." "What do we do?" I said. "If we dump the air now, we stop," Cole said. "We stop wherever we are. We become the problem. If we don't dump the air, we ride. And maybe this train was never supposed to stop because the person who made it so knew that everything it carries shouldn't spend 10 minutes under a sun that hasn't been vetted. I don't like that, but I know good procedures when I see the shape of them." June breathed in, then out, on the 4s. "We need more information," she said. We move forward. If the head end is crude, we talk. If it isn't, we see what this train is supposed to be. We left the angle cock alone. We killed the mid-train engine with the emergency fuel cutoff, watched it coast into silence, watched the other unit in the pair take up the load with a long, unhappy groan. The train gave one big shiver, then steadied. We moved forward. The next 2 hours were practicum in fear management. The couplers were mercifully on our side. The grades were friendly. Westbound on the Chillicothe sub towards Galesburg has long, easy profiles designed to keep tonnage moving. The detectors gave us their little gifts. No defects, no dragging equipment. Total axles 536. If there had been a hotbox or a broken flange, we might have been forced to stop without a choice. Whoever built this plan, if there was a plan, had picked the best of everything you'd pick if you wanted motion to be the norm. We passed through Galesburg without the expected yard belly. The scanner told me something I'd never heard in 10,000 hours on that band. A dispatcher clearing a westbound freight through the entire terminal with no meets and no crew referral. 3205, you are lined through Galesburg, Maine 2 to Cameron. No opposing traffic. It sounded like a taped loop. It sounded like a macro someone had said and walked away from. We found the head end near Cameron because the wind changed. The air was warmer near the locomotives. The wash from the radiators turning the space between train and sky into a heat shimmer. The lead unit was a GE ES44C4, designed with fewer powered axles, and a little wizardry in how the load transfers, tied in a lash-up with another AC. The cab was dark in the way of cabs with someone inside who doesn't want attention. The number boards were lit but dimmed. Cole stayed low and crabbed up the steps like he was visiting an old friend who didn't like being surprised. He tried the door and it didn't move. He keyed the handle and it was the first door we touched that talked to his brass. It clicked. He stopped with his hand on the latch. He looked over his shoulder at us and at the horizon behind my head. "There's no good version," he said. "There's only the version that leaves us doing the next right thing." He opened the door. The cab was clean, the way a ship's bridge is clean. The engineer's desk had a clipboard with a track warrant and a printed plan sheet tucked under a clip, the kind I'd seen 100 times on a midnight ballast train. Pencil marks highlighted a route, the kind of line you draw when you want to tell someone what's possible and hope the world doesn't refute you. The man in the engineer's seat had a radio headset around his neck and a blue disposable mask hanging under his chin. He didn't turn when the door opened because he couldn't. His skin had the color of old paper. His eyes were closed, and they weren't going to open here again. He had been gone long enough to be still. There was a strip of tape across the alerter button. The heel of a wrench held it down. June did what she could do, which was to touch his wrist gently and tilt her head and confirm what we all knew. Then she placed her hand over the man's knuckles and moved his fingers from the throttle gently like she was smoothing a sheet over a bed. The throttle was in notch 6. The automatic brake handle was in running. The independent was released. The PTC display glowed an even green I didn't trust. The trip optimizer page said manual control, profile active. Cole reached for the alerter tape and tore it away. The cab made a sound like a tiny classroom bell when the system noticed the change. The train didn't slow. He set the power, he taped the alerter, he cut out the penalties, Cole said. "See the circuit breaker panel, PTC penalty cutout, ATC cutout, overspeed cutout? They're all tagged and cut. Someone who knows the rack did this. There's a remote device in play too." He pointed at a small, ruggedized black box velcroed just above the radio. It had a bright green LED and a sticker that said Leader Trip Optimizer Interface. It was wired to the locomotive's brains in a way that said someone with Wobtech training had said it. If the dispatcher stayed ahead of him, and if signals got babied into place, and if no one else wanted this track at this hour, this train could go a long way before it needed a human again. June found a folded sheet in the center console. It was handwritten. She read it, then passed it to me. The paper was from a BNSF pad. The first lines said, "Do not stop inside city limits or within 5 miles of a major industrial plant. If you must stop, stop near an access road and leave the reefers sealed. If you are not at the controls, do not approach the reefer string. Cool temperature depresses activity, do not warm." Under that, a different hand had written 3 words I didn't know what to do with. Rolling quarantine test. "Who locked our door?" I said. June pointed to a line at the bottom with a name and a number. Dana K., Cicero Dispatch. Under it, Amtrak Police, date Mendez. The number was a direct line to a desk that wasn't being answered, wherever it was. Someone had built this in a hurry and died holding it up. Cole slid into the engineer's seat like a man stepping onto a boat. He put the throttle back to idle. Nothing changed. He applied a little independent, just enough to test whether the unit would recognize a command. The train took offense for a second and then shrugged it off. "It's downstream," he said. "Distributed power is pushing. The train is trailing an engine on the back end. That's why it never slows. They set it as a pusher to maintain speed through dark signals and were going to cut it at a safe spot downline. And then the world fell apart." The radio squawked. Not on the railroad band, on the exterior speaker wired to the police band side of the locomotive radio. It was a clipped, professional voice, with too much static and too much fatigue. 3205. If you're up there, you're running under blanket authority to keep moving. You will be lined clear to KCY. Do not stop in population centers. CDC requested continuous cooling and motion. You've got sealed bioloads. We don't want them warmed, and we don't want them opened. "Who is this?" I said, keying the mic by reflex. My voice came out calm because that is a skill I hadn't realized I'd retained. "Cicero," the voice said. "If you've got a pulse in that seat, congratulations, you're the engineer. Do not stop in a yard, not in daylight. If you have to stop, find a stretch outside of town with road access. There is a response team headed to intercept south of Marceline. Repeat, do not open AR men reefers marked with a red triangle." The radio washed into static then. A minute later, the detector at milepost 219 gave us another "no defects," like the world was fine, like this was a routine run. We worked because there wasn't any other work but this. Cole set the controls to the only safe thing. Throttle idle, no brake. Let the tail power decide for now. We had to find the trailing power and take it out of the equation. Then the head end would behave like any heavy train at speed. Momentum first, then the air. We could pick a place to dump and hope the line was clear. We moved rearward, and I carry that decision in my hands now when they shake. We had to pass the reefers again. We had to walk by the tapping we pretended was code. We had to not look directly at the square of cold mist feathering out at the edge of a door that had been tightened against a seal not meant for that kind of pressure. We had to not think about what it felt like inside that box. Air so cold it burned, metal contracting, and the patient sense of being in a white room with no clocks. If a human was inside, they would have been still by now. The tapping told a story that made less sense than that. I've heard things the body can do when it's asked to do a trick it didn't evolve for. I've heard what respiration sounds like when the brain doesn't ask for it fast enough. I've heard the silly, stubborn persistence of muscle firing when there's no audience. If you asked me what I think was in that car, I'd tell you what the word quarantine suggests. And I'd tell you that there's a reason someone drew a symbol that wasn't quite the one we all know, and put it where an honest pair of hands might see it and stop themselves. We found the trailing unit 10 cars from the rear. A single engine coupled into the consist like an afterthought and doing all the thinking by itself. The open walkway gave us a platform. The cut levers, front and back, were easy to see. The brake pipe and main reservoir hoses were right there, with the angle cock handles safety wired again. Cole looked at me and nodded once. I cut the wire. He put one hand on the handle and then stopped. "Not here," he said. We were rolling over a big steel trestle. The river below was green-black and uninviting. We wait for a straight and a road, minimal grade. "Who set this up?" Ravi asked. "Because the kind of mind that builds takes an interest in the other minds that build, even when they disagree with them." "Someone who knew how to keep a cold chain and a conscience alive in the same room," Cole said. He put his hand on the angle cock again, then took it off, then put it back. He was reading the ground with his knees and his teeth. We dump on a tangent with gravel roads on both sides and farmland stretched to the horizons. We don't dump on a curve. We don't dump on a bridge. We don't dump near a town. 3 miles later, the land opened like a gate. Fields spread in long rectangles. A section road paralleled the line on both sides. The detector at milepost 242 sang the good news again. No defects. The grade was mild. The sky was a slate bowl, low and kind. Cole wrapped his arm through the stanchion and set his knuckles against the handle. "On 3, he said. "June, lock your elbows. Walt, keep your feet wide. Katia, eyes open behind us. Sam, if I let go, you push it the rest of the way." He pulled. There's a sound a brake pipe makes when it vents that I still hear in the middle of other sounds now. A flat, hungry rush that feels like a wrong note resolved. The air blew out. The train's spine felt it and told every car, and every car told the trucks. The freight didn't stop. It considered the possibility. The trailing unit dug in for a fraction of a second like a dog that doesn't want to let go of a rope and then realized the rope was in the river. It went to idle and pouted. Somewhere ahead, the head end shivered and sighed as the system took the information and made it physics. Slack is a beast that remembers everything you've done to it. 100+ cars told each other that their connections had changed, and the argument rippled forward like a fuse. We held on. The world tilted in small, helpful ways because someone had built this line to encourage trains to do what trains want to do when they calm down. I counted silently, not the way a person counts, but the way a dispatcher might, watching a track occupation indicator go slow from one block to the next. We didn't stop all at once. We stopped like a planet remembers to move even when it sleeps. The first full halt didn't happen until the trailing unit had rolled past 3 field access roads and a little red schoolhouse that had been vacant since forever. When it did, the silence was so aggressive that I put a hand to my chest to make sure my own machine was still running. A meadowlark sang 3 notes like a joke. The wind moved in a way that made the heat off the engine's radiator feel indulgent. We had done the thing you aren't supposed to do. We had done it where the ground was kind and the sky was not going to punish us for a minute. We had stopped the train that never stopped. Cole reached for the radio on the unit's exterior cabinet and keyed. "Any dispatcher copy, 3205 West," he said. He used a tone I'd heard on the worst nights in the county, when he had to notify a hospital that a room was needed and a family that this might be the end. "Emergency application, trailing unit, controlled stop, tangent track, rural, requesting instruction." The radio answered with a hiss and then with a voice whose vowels told me Kansas City. 3205, it said, hold position. Road crew en route, do not open marked reefers. Repeat, do not open marked reefers. We have a team on a roadway at the County 57 that will meet you at the trailing power. 15 minutes. 15 minutes measured different out here. It felt like a church bell ringing through a town in a movie. We sat on the walkway and each of us breathed with all the attention your body can give a simple thing. The doors we had passed with the little fog at their lips didn't get any warmer at this distance. They were just doors now, and they did their job, which was to contain. June put a hand on my forearm. "You did the right thing before," she said. And I wanted to laugh because I couldn't tell which part of the before she meant. 2 trucks came up the section road fast enough to make a dust wake like a ship in shallow water. One was a white crew cab with an orange beacon. The other was a state truck in a color designed to vanish on a winter day. Men and women in yellow vests got out, and a woman with her hair pulled back under a cap like a person who has been in rooms with procedures for a long time looked at all of us and then at the engine like it might give her better answers. She had a patch that said Public Health and another that said Rail Emergency. "Don't open the reefers," she said before she said hello, and then she said hello and told us her name was Ramos. "We have to get this moving again. We have to get you off safely. We have to leave the marked cars intact." "What's inside?" I asked. She looked down the line as if she could find a good way to explain that wasn't a sentence. We had contact with a lab in Chicago. Samples. Not just samples. I don't want to say it in a way that creates a picture you won't forget. Biological material maintained at a low temperature to degrade activity. They were trying to send them west to a place that still had containment protocols. That plan unraveled 90 minutes after they put the first pallet on a car. They asked the railroad for a continuous run to keep temperatures stable and per CDC request. The decision was made to hold motion with minimal human interaction until we could route them onto a siding in a secure location. That was 3 days ago. The person who made the last decision in the chain died of exhaustion on a dispatch desk at Cicero, or so I'm told. "Why lock us in?" Walt asked. A gentle farmer's hurt in it that made me want to put a hand on his shoulder. Ramos looked at the F-box we had climbed and the small dent in its side where someone had hit it with a baton to get our attention. "Because people still see a train and think of shelter," she said. "And the person who locked you in thought the safest place for you until they could get you off was in a car that didn't open onto the reefer string or the machinery cars. They were right if they were going to meet you. They were wrong to leave you. They made a choice that was the least bad one they could make, and then the world refused to give them enough minutes to finish the choice." We told her about the tapping. We said it without the drama we felt because none of us wanted to give the world more appetite than it already had. She nodded once, long and slow. "We won't open them here," she said. "We'll tow the whole string. We'll reroute south around the population center. We'll bring this to a containment point west of Emporia where we've set up a cold shed with proper lockout. We'll let people with suits and clipboards and courage take the door off and do the next right thing." I wanted to argue. My whole chest was a question mark with elbows. But June didn't argue. She nodded, and then she did something that still makes me hold my breath when I think of it. She asked how she could help. Ramos told her. Cole listened like he was reading a book he couldn't afford and then said he could move the head end once we took the shove out of the tail. He said it in the tone of a man asking permission to do the thing he had been born to do, and then stopped doing when he retired. And Ramos gave him that permission with a brief, respectful dip of her chin. We came off the train in a way that felt less like disembarking and more like stepping from a moving belief to the ground. My boots found gravel with unembarrassing grace. A field of soybean to our right tilted with the wind like an ocean. A red-tailed hawk made a clean straight line across the sky, and I loved it in a way that was not reasonable for an animal that didn't know our names. The crew brought a portable compressor to recharge the brake pipe. Cole climbed into the head end with a new partner and set the consist up for a controlled start with the tail power idled. The alerter beeped like a polite friend. The trip optimizer display caught up to the fact that a human was now the chief actuator. When they pulled away, the reefers sang again, and I had to put my fist against my mouth because a small, folded thing inside me wanted to whistle a tune it had heard in a different life, the sound of something doing what it was built to do without asking if it still should. Ramos stood beside me with her arms folded and watched the long train reassemble its mind and move. "You'll feel like you should have done more," she said, not looking at me as she said it. "That's a healthy feeling. Keep it, but don't feed it until it eats your sleep. You did exactly the amount of right that keeps other right things possible." "What happens if someone opens one of the marked cars before you get there?" I asked. "We've run models," she said. "They're not perfect. We know that motion helps. We know that cold helps. We know that some of what we carry now in this country can be kept less active when it's treated like freight instead of like a word that cuts your mouth. We also know that even in the old days, people broke quarantine because fear writes itself in big letters over small words. So we set up plans that don't require faith. We make the train the plan." "Who drew that symbol?" Ravi asked, "the red triangle." Ramos smiled without humor. "A freight conductor with a Sharpie and a conscience," she said. "He told me he didn't want to write the word on the side of anything that rolls through towns at night. He thought a triangle would discourage hands as well as any word. I told him I would have chosen a circle. He told me triangles are for warning signs. We left it because sometimes you pick your arguments carefully." Later, in a county fairground building turned into a staging hall with cots and a coffee urn that someone had made heroic by keeping it full, we lay on our backs and felt the lack of motion like a sickness passing. Katia talked about how the interstates had gone from arteries to clots and how a train looked like a vein you could trust. Walt told a story about a harvest 15 years ago when the elevator took grain at 3 in the morning and the line of trucks looked like a parade that forgot its floats. Ravi talked about how he wanted to build tools that fail towards safety and how he had always imagined doing that for clean rooms and labs, not for a box with steel wheels. Cole slept because you can turn a railroad man sideways and he sleeps, but before he did, he told me something that has become a way I look at days. "Trains are stubborn," he said. "They're democratic. They go where the rails go, and the rails go where the ground lets them. You keep them moving because a stopped train is a problem twice, once for itself and once for the thing it blocks. When the world breaks, the first instinct is to stop, but sometimes the right thing is to keep moving until you can stop without making a bigger ruin." June lay with her hand over her eyes and finally let her breath come with no rhythm at all. I lay awake because I have always been a man who documents and repairs, and the way you do both is by not missing a detail, not even the ones that would let you rest. I wrote down the detector mileposts I remembered, and the way the angle cock handle felt in my hand when it turned, and the quality of the silence when the train came off its power. I wrote down the fact that when we stepped off, I could feel the ground as a solid, and then after a minute I didn't because my bones remembered the sway. I wrote down that the train started again because we said so and not because it couldn't help itself. A day later, word came like weather does. Spread out, uneven, definite when it arrived. The string was across Kansas and then past the red dirt near Daly's and then into a yard outside a Navajo Nation border town where a cold shed had been put up in a warehouse that used to store feed. People with face shields and measured voices took the reefers in pairs. They handled each door like a door and each piece of the world like a piece. Someone called the project the Rolling Quarantine Train because people like names and because they help pencils track budgets. I didn't like the name, but I liked that the pencils were still there. We got a ride east, as far as Peoria. From there, the road bent toward home like a finger. Chicago was quieter. Power was on for blocks at a time like daylight is reliable. The river didn't smell like oil for a blessed hour around sunset. The buildings stood the way they always have, serious, full of the accumulated effort of hands that will never get mentioned. We walked under a viaduct where someone had painted a mural that didn't have any words but called itself a prayer anyway. June peeled an apple with the nurse's clean economy and split it 5 ways. Ravi built a little antenna on a hotel balcony and got the NOAA weather band like a benediction. Walt fell asleep in a chair. Katia wrote down every road we'd seen and then wrote down every road we hadn't. I keep the paper with the 3 words on it folded in my wallet, not because I like them, but because they are a confession from a person who had to write instructions when instruction felt like faith and moving felt like a sin. Rolling quarantine test. When I wake at night now, it's not the train I hear first, and it isn't the tapping. It's the breath of people I trust and the other small sounds a city makes when it remembers how to be itself. The train still moves somewhere. Some piece of it is still moving in my chest, stopping in the right places, not stopping in the wrong ones. If you told me I'd ever be grateful to a taped alerter and a cutout switch and a stranger's hand on a padlock, I'd have laughed in your face. Now I carry that gratitude like a key on a lanyard. We boarded a moving freight we believed to be empty. It wasn't. It held grain and machinery and something sealed in refrigeration units better than any door I've closed in my life. It held instructions someone wrote with a pencil and a heart that was failing on a desk in Cicero. It held the certainty that movement could be used for something other than flight. It held, for a night and a morning, the knowledge that you can be locked in and still be more free than the people who lock you thought you were. And it taught us, in the loud, stubborn language of steel, that stopping is a decision you earn, not a gift you wait for. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.